think gene editing on humans will become widely adopted sometime in the future?
Yeah, I think that they're making progress on like single gene mutation, like syndromes with that are like just a single gene mutation, like with they can use CRISPR-Cas9 to treat things. They're already, I think, with like for like sickle cell anemia. I think it gets a lot more, which is amazing, which is so wonderful, right? Like if we could have treatments, I think, for these kinds of things, like cystic fibrosis, and I have a friend who has a daughter with Rett syndrome, and so if we can develop, treatments for these, I think it would be amazing and wonderful. And I think kind of it's still pretty far future about like conditions that involve multiple genes, right? Like and things like intelligence and things like that are both nature and nurture, right? Like that are also environmentally determined. I think that's a lot more complex. But, it does seem to be here. I was just at a conference, and it was an ethics conference, and a scientist from the National Academies was there. He's a neuroscientist, and he was there to say, he's like, there are going to be massive advances in biology, in the biological science, with CRISPR and AI and synthetic biology, which is basically you're creating new proteins in the lab that don't exist in nature. So you're actually creating like new forms of life.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
Wow.
Super, super powerful. Oh, at quantum computing, he said, right, and he said these are coming soon, and it's going to be like massive. And he said the problem is that they're working on like policies, because we can affect, right? Like you're not allowed to clone a human, for example. We can have policies that prohibit certain things or guide, the use of certain technologies. He said, he's like, so there's scientists in the room and there's like industry people. He's like, but there's not enough ethicists in the room. And he was at this conference like to say like, look, ethicists, you guys need to get in the room. And if I can help you do that, like, he wanted to kind of just like build some bridges, which I thought was really cool. But also it was a little alarming, what his message too, that there's currently not people in the room.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do think that it will. Yeah.
Do you think it's one thing to like cure diseases with it, and then what if it's something like there's male pattern baldness in my family? Do I want to change that? Can
Right.
I have the genetic
Right, or
therapy
maybe
for that?
you wished your parents had changed your genes so you wouldn't. Yeah. It's a really hard question because it involves a lot of what we think of as like normal versus and able-bodied versus disabled and not normal or deviant in some way, and so even with like the medical, treatments, something like autism, some people, or Down syndrome, disability rights scholars and activists would say that this is maybe something that you don't need to cure. That having Down syndrome, for many people, they have rich and full lives, of course, and they have even maybe in some ways better lives than someone without Down syndrome, and so they would say that we shouldn't think of that as something lesser or worse, that instead it's like society that causes them the harm that comes from having, say, Down syndrome. in terms of like arranging, whatever technologies or our living spaces or system, and prejudice, right? It's people are prejudiced, right? Have discriminate against disabled people, right? But that they argue that that's where the harm comes from. And so using these technologies to like eradicate those kinds of conditions, they would argue devalues those people, and different, ways of living and different kinds of good lives.
Yeah, I also feel like disabilities like that, and even things like intelligence or personality, for example, that they're genetically influenced, but there's an environmental factor for those.
Yeah.
But if you change the genes for those, you kind of change the person itself. So it's almost as if you're killing the old person and making a new person.
Right. So that's what they would argue, something like that, right? Like, this is part of your identity. This is actually making you. It's an enormous power, right? To have, and so, but other people argue that, say it's clearly better to be able to hear, because we get like so much pleasure, from beautiful sounds, and we can communicate with spoken language. And that some people, some philosophers would argue that in fact you shouldn't be just allowed to edit genes to avoid maybe something like deafness, which by the way, the deaf community like really disputes. So not only should you be allowed to use the treatments, but some argue that a parent would be obligated, because to not do that would be in a way to like cause a harm to the child or whatever. So it's a very hard, difficult.
Yeah, that's
question.
Interesting, because I know I forgot his name, but there's a pianist, and he was born blind, but that made him much more sensitive to sound, and that gives him, the incredible ability to play the piano the way he does.
Right. And nobody is like saying like he would be forced, like if there was some treatment, right, that he would be, that could cure his blindness, that he would be forced to undergo this treatment. So like for living people, it seems like you would have choice, right? Like you can honor their wishes, right? In most cases, I mean, some people might not have the mental capacity to like make that choice for themselves, and then it gets super complicated as well, right? Because they can't give consent. So if you're like in a coma, or if your mental capacity is so low that you can't like meaningfully give consent, then who gets to decide? But if you're thinking of like parents like editing their children's genes, that's the people in favor, say that should be just the parent's choice. This should not be anything that's mandatory. It should not be, state-run, because you don't want the kinds of horrific eugenics programs that we had in the 20th century. But it's still the parent, is making this choice for this child.
Yeah. Almost mirrors the abortion issue. We shouldn't get into that. It'd be too much. But so I'm actually not too sure about the technical aspects of it, but do you think there'll be technology to? It'd probably be much easier to edit the genes of a zygote, like as when it's only a single cell. You only have to edit one single cell genes, and that just populate through the entire body. But is it possible to edit genes after someone's born? So if you're like trying to enhance muscles, like you can just add them to these muscles? I don't know. I don't know exactly, but for sure, I mean, they're using CRISPR to treat sickle cell anemia on people that are living, right? So like as a treatment for people who are living. So I think what it does, I'm not an expert, but it goes in, it cuts open the DNA
like, and it can take out the gene that's flawed or whatever, and then it can replace it with another gene. And so you can do it on a living person. There's still, it's still hard. Like there's big questions about off target. Like, so if you do something to this gene, is there going to be an effect on a different gene that you didn't intend? And so that's why it's still in like early like stages. And so, so, but I think what, like this scientist that I mentioned before, he said that AI like can help solve that off-target problem.
Is it the sort of thing where like one gene might program for more than one phenotype?
I don't know. Yeah.
Hmm,
But we're a long way though from you being able to like go to your clinic and say, oh, give me the gene for stronger muscles, right?
We're not there yet.
We're not quite there. I mean, we're actually a very, very long. I think we're actually a long way from this designer baby, thing. Like even I've read that like eye color is not even that easy to, to change, to understand like how, which genes are like involved in that. So we're far away from this designer baby. Although, on the other hand, we do have like pre-implantation diagnosis. So we do have already technologies where you can do some of this. So you could choose like sex, you could choose for some, genetic components. So, right. So this would be, is if you have like in vitro fertilization and you've got like several embryos, you can fertilize, right? You can test them, you can determine their sex. You can test for some conditions, some health conditions, and then you can select the ones that you want. And so already we're doing this
on a smaller capacity.
On a smaller capacity, and there's some regulations. Like most clinics won't let you just select for sex, except like some of them will now. Like for like purposes of like family balance, so like if you have like 3 boys and you want a girl, then maybe they'll let you. I think so right. So there's, but I don't know exactly the level of regulation on that. Like if that's just sort of voluntary regulation, or what. But it can be used for. Right, to select against, to deselect for like medical conditions.
Yeah, and there's also, I think the big idea about modernity is that our genes are optimized for our primal ancestors and our environment back then. But now that we're in this environment, there's a lot of mismatch between what we want and what our environment provides. So, like we might be really inclined to eat unhealthy foods like potato chips, stuff like that. Do you think there'll be, once the technology gets there, do you think we will start to change those genes and change what it means to be a human?
Yeah, I think that we're flirting. It's an enormous power, right? Like where we can actually like change our own bodies in ways that are not, following natural selection, right? And this long evolutionary process. As far as the potato chips, I think it would be easier or maybe better just to change the food system that we live under so that all of these things that were so unhealthy yet cheap and widely available are not, right? That we instead have healthy foods that are widely available that, but I've heard like even like with climate change, we could engineer smaller bodies so that we can emit less carbon, right? Okay. Or like that or to engineer like a intolerance for meat, for like meat eating, right? Because like meat, like beef especially, contributes tons of emissions of greenhouse gas emissions. And so if we engineered ourselves to not be able to tolerate meat, then our desire to eat meat would go away.
Wow.
We'd reduce our emissions,
or we
right?
could engineer the cows differently so they don't emit
Right.
as much.
I think that they are actually trying to
They're
do
trying to,
that. I think they are, right? And whether it's through food, like they're trying to give them like food, like seaweed diets that reduce the methane, but they might also be able, I wonder if they could also engineer the
Somehow
cows
change that.
themselves
Yeah.
too. Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, because, we think about like what our preferences are now and versus what, like, they're contingent on our society, and so what if the preferences change, so like what if you design your baby to conform to, say, very conventional ideas of beauty, but then like those ideas of beauty change over time, right? Like the question of whether we'd know, how do you know what the best thing to design for is? And again, too, I don't know, with the climate change question, well, maybe, like the potato chip question, maybe we should work on climate change instead of like, right? Maybe we should, right? Like, yeah, instead of altering our bodies like in that way. I don't know. I'm not saying it's obviously wrong to do something like that.
Yeah. There's a lot to think about there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then would it be voluntary? Like, so only like the environmentalists would be like, designing their kids to not eat meat or whatever.
Yeah.
Or would we require it
They might argue
in
it
the
should be
name of,
required,
right?
yeah,
We
so.
could argue it should be required in the name, of reducing emissions or something like that. But then you get into the same kinds of, eugenics problems
Yeah.
that were in the 20th century.
Yeah. It seems like my intuition is that we shouldn't do designer babies. We shouldn't change traits that will be inherited
Like the germ line.
Yeah, the germ line.
Yeah.
But maybe we do have a right to change specific aspects of ourselves once we're an adult.
Yeah.
Yeah. The way
Yeah.
plastic surgery is a thing, maybe we can.
Right. I
similar
mean,
thing for genetic.
like we want to enjoy great autonomy over our bodies, right? And we alter our bodies, all the time. So is this just another,
Next
step in that direction? Yeah.
Yeah.